Okay, so we left off talking about some of the various acts that have been passed by Parliament against the colonists, and as we have mentioned, a lot of these acts, it's not so much the fact that they're taxing them, it's the fact that they are not getting represented in Parliament that really upsets the colonists. And it seems as if they're losing their independence, or also sometimes they're known as autonomy, their ability to rule over themselves. So these are some issues that are getting brought up during this period, and we'll look at some more things that kind of snowball into becoming bigger issues kind of following the Boston Massacre and those various acts that were passed up until 1770. So we'll kind of pick up there and kind of discuss up to the outbreak of the war, Lexington and Concord, and we'll even go further with Bunker Hill and all that kind of stuff. So just watch through and hope you get it. Okay, in the last PowerPoint or viewing we saw, there was the issuing of the Townshend Acts. Eventually, those are going to be repealed and pulled back and gotten rid of, except for that on the tea. And that's something that kind of remains on the books, and we'll see that in the future with the Tea Act. But for the most part, all those other items are pulled off the list. Those glass, lead, paint, and so forth are pulled off. And then we saw the Quartering Act eventually it expires. So we could see that that also is causing a lot of tension in the colonies because of the fact that British troops are being housed there. Eventually that will expire. So in 1772, the Crown announced pay for governors and judges actually is going to come from the Crown, not from the colonists. Well, this causes some issues because the colonists at this point, if they're paying for them, they're kind of answering to them. So they kind of feared that they would now be ignored by the governors and judges at this point. So if the Crown's paying for they're paying their salary, oftentimes they would probably side more with the Crown. And before, the colonists were paying them, so they thought that maybe they had a better chance or more of a fair chance when dealing with politics and being judged in court. Also, tax on tea remains to show that the British government, under the control of George III, had the right and the power to tax. So it's not just the right to do it, but the power to do it is extended with that tea tax. So colonists from 21 members come together and form what is known as a Committee of Correspondence. And one of the leaders of this is that rebellious Samuel Adams, as we've talked about before. And it's basically created to spread word, sometimes propaganda, and keep other colonies and individuals informed on what's going on in their colony. So basically, it'd be kind of like now people, as we saw in the revolutions that happened in the Middle East and so forth, using Twitter to keep people posted and Facebook on what's going on, where to meet, how to do things, and sometimes to disseminate information, and sometimes it's misinformed information to incite people to join their cause and so forth. And Samuel Adams will be leading that Committee of Correspondence. So it's letters being sent out to rally the people behind a cause and inform people. So here you can see that most of those regions that were found to have these committees of correspondence, as Sam Adams is the leader in Boston, they got the other various towns and so forth on the perimeter. A lot of times port cities, but you also have more interior cities like Philadelphia become kind of these links and these hubs that will be used to help inform people and protect them against the ideas and stuff that's being created by the British at that point. So we see the enactment of the British Tea Act in 1773. So the British East India Company was almost bankrupt. That means they're running out of money. And one way to kind of increase sales, they thought, was to lower the tax on them, so they got to sell it duty-free. So Parliament passed the Tea Act in 1773, excused the company for paying certain duties or import taxes so that they could sell their overproduced product on the American colonists. So they directly deal with American agents. It gave a monopoly on the British East India Company at this point, which a lot of the colonists worried about because now this is the only seller there, which is not very capitalistic or does not create competition, which oftentimes is a monopoly, as we know. So the Sons of Liberty in Philadelphia and New York basically threatened tea importers and pledged to boycott tea. Sometimes we have the Daughters of Liberty sometimes brewing their own teas from local herbs and stuff to boycott those. And eventually we see the escalation of the Boston Tea Party on December 16, 1773. Some colonists dressed as Indians or Native Americans boarded tea ships in Boston and started dumping 342 chests of tea into the water. So this protest is becoming very active and almost violent. It's more violent, as we'll see in Annapolis, where they actually burned some ships as they sat in harbor with the tea on them instead of just throwing it into the harbor. So you can see here in this image the Boston Tea Party as the colonists are kind of cheering them on as they throw it into the water of the harbor. So it's not even, they didn't even confiscate it and steal it. Instead, they were protesting it and throwing it into the waters, telling them that it's no good and they don't want their tea to be sold there and they'd rather not have tea altogether. Well, by this point, the British government has been pushed to its limits pretty much. So Parliament's very angry about the Tea Party because it's not only that the colonists seem like they're being rebellious. They're being very actively rebellious and almost violent. So Parliament responds by passing what they call the coercive acts, like they're trying to coerce them to do something, which was 4 laws basically designed to punish Boston and the rest of Massachusetts and pretty much show the rest of the colonies the control that they should have over the colonies at this point. The colonists, on the other hand, will call this the intolerable acts, as if they couldn't even tolerate them. They're just horrible laws that are being passed by Parliament. The first one is that they closed the the port of Boston. So there's no trade going in and out, which would basically sever their economy and make them very weak. And they were very reliant on that. So no supplies coming in or out, no food, anything like that. They revoked the Massachusetts Charter, and now there's no town meeting. So basically they're taking away their government. They allowed royal officials who were charged with crimes in Massachusetts to be tried in other colonies or in Britain, basically to avoid hostile juries. So it's almost like they can get away with crimes. So they don't like this, the colonists at least. And a new quartering act is going to be initiated, which ordered local officials to provide food and housing in private homes. So this only angers them even further. Not only do you have British troops being stationed in the colonies, but also now you have to feed and house these individuals that you don't want there. Luckily, some of the neighboring colonies will support Massachusetts and send in supplies and food to their aid, as they're kind of being constricted and punished at this point. So kind of these other colonies, they're being put in timeout. Some of these other colonies know that they're being put in timeout for a wrong reason, so some of the kids would be like helping them out by getting them stuff if they're in detention or something like that. So basically, like in a sense, I guess Boston and Massachusetts is put in ISS, and these people are coming to their aid sometimes as they're being punished. Okay, another thing that Parliament's going to pass that really infuriated the colonists, especially in the Massachusetts area, was known as the Quebec Act, which was passed in 1774 too, and it further angered these colonists. It extended Quebec's boundary south of the Ohio River. So those places that were once under English are going back to the French, and these French Roman Catholics are kind of in their neighboring Protestant area, and that only incites them and makes them angrier. It's kind of like giving your enemy something. After they lost a battle, they're giving them something back. So the French, as we know, were pretty much supposed to be expelled from the region. They were given kind of a quarantine place, but now they're expanding their boundaries to punish not only Massachusetts, but other colonies that are neighboring them. So it's kind of like after fighting a war. So if we, this kind of situation would be like us sending and telling Iraq, oh, you can have this back after we just fought them in a war or something like that, or giving in to the Taliban in Afghanistan following the war. So it's kind of only to infuriate the colonists even further, and it does, believe me. And from this image, you can see that it is the shaded areas that are primarily brownish. You can see that the line that is created here starts going into the interior, which was neighboring these areas of New England and New York, and that really just meant that they now have a barrier where all the people that they hate, especially religiously, are neighboring them even closer, and they're given rights that they're not even being given. So their former enemies seem to be treated better than they are their own colonists and their own English subjects at this point. Okay, so things are escalating very quickly at this point. So between September and October of 1774, representatives of every colony except Georgia, because Georgia is going to be kind of late on the scene as we know, and it's very loyal to the crown, attended the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. It's not going to be a lawmaking body, but basically a convention where delegates could discuss their grievances, what they had issues with. Grievances just means you have an issue with something. And some delegates wanted the colonies to remain part of the British Empire. They're not wanting to break away at this point. Some of them still want to remain part of the English Empire. And then the Declaration resolves that's passed, expressed loyalty to the British Crown, so they're saying that they're still loyal. It also stated that the colonists had rights as British subjects. They're saying we're still loyal, but we deserve our rights, and maintained that colonists had a right to the free and exclusive power of legislation in their several provincial legislatures. They wanted to be able to get back to having their own governing bodies here in the colonies, not necessarily being told across the sea by England what to do. And then eventually the delegates called for a ban on all trade with Great Britain to try and hurt them economically. And we do that sometimes here, like we'll put economic sanctions on Russia, and that's a hope to make them stop doing what they're doing, perhaps in Ukraine or other places like the Crimea. Okay, the colonies are considered to be pretty much an open rebellion. For King George III, who's the ruling king at this point, the Continental Congress was the last straw. So in September of 1774, he wrote Lord North at this point and said that the New England governments are in a state of rebellion, and blows must decide whether they are to be subject to this country or independent. Essentially what he's saying is we're about to go to war because these people need to either be independent by fighting their way out of it, or they need to become more under our guidance and being subjected to English law, which they don't seem to be doing at this point. So it's getting to a heated point where he is basically calling on war to end this crisis or rebellion that's occurring in the colonies. Okay, so we've got some of the first battles of the American Revolution at Lexington and Concord. So General Gage is the British officer who decides to seize rebel military supplies stored at Concord, Massachusetts. And that way, if he has their supplies, it pretty much will cut them off and make them less militarily efficient and basically constrict them. So on April 18th, 1775, under the cover of night, some 750 British troops leave Boston, which was one of their major hubs, and head towards securing these supplies. The Patriots, which are the colonists who supported independence. So you have Patriots who support independence, and then you have Loyalists who are colonists who still are loyal to the crown. Had stationed watchmen as a result of that. The Patriots, such as Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott, basically went on to alert them that the British were coming, and get them ready in preparation, these Minutemen, to jump at the last minute to be able to come to aid and protect the colonies from the British intrusion as they kind of made their way towards these supplies. As you can tell from the red, those are going to be the British troop movements, and then you can see the blue area up in this corner is where they kind of came in and tried to hold that position at Concord. But as you can see through there, Lexington will be the first one, and then the second one at Concord, where they'll actually engage one another. And they were told basically to not shoot until you can see the white in their eyes. So make sure that they're very close and that you will not miss these individuals as you fire upon them. And we'll see that as they make their route from Boston outward and then back towards Boston. Okay, and the last thing we're going to look at is what is known as a shot heard around the world, basically saying this war, this revolution that was created, kind of became a domino effect for other countries and other colonies in the future to push for independence and so forth. So the British troops, called Redcoats because of the bright red uniforms that they wore, at this point marched on to Concord trying to stop or gain the supply there. The red uniforms and orderly marching formation used by the British made them easy targets, obviously. And oftentimes, you're going to see that they're very almost too disciplined in their orders and so forth. So the American colonists oftentimes used more of a guerrilla-type warfare because the numbers were not in their favor. So the Patriots were quite successful, suffering fewer than 100 casualties in the fight that day, while killing or wounding around 273 British soldiers. So at early onset, it looks as if the colonists aren't doing too bad with the numbers that they're supplied, as well as the resources that they have, and they're going to hold their own for quite some time, but they have to use different tactics than the English are using up until this point because of the numbers and the situation that they're fighting. And we'll talk further about that, but go ahead and work through that worksheet and kind of look through this PowerPoint and try and be on point when we get back to class to discuss these issues and these events. Take care.